This podcast is brought to you with the kind support of Harbour View Equity Partners. Harbour View Equity Partners is a global investment firm focused on opportunities in the entertainment and media space. Founded by Sharice Clark-Soares, Harbour View is a long-term investor in content with an industrial platform built to protect, optimize, and enhance the legacy of premium IP. With a vision of becoming a true stakeholder in the global value of content, Harbour View believes creators deserve a seat at the table creatively and economically, owning their narrative and maximizing value for all. In celebration of our partnership with Harbour View Equity Partners, we have chosen a separate piece of music for each podcast in Series 1. We hope you enjoy it.
When somebody is not necessarily performing, and you kind of know that they're good, but you can't quite work out what it is, and when you find the thing that it is, and it's just about listening and understanding somebody, and then asking them if they want to have a go at a role, and they fly, I don't think there's a feeling like it.
I'm Aoife Devitt, and welcome to the 50 Faces podcast, a podcast committed to revealing the richness and diversity of the world of investment by focusing on its people and their stories. I'm joined today by Stuart Heatley, who is Managing Director at Capita Pensions, where he is a business transformation and growth leader. He previously held a series of similar roles at Aon and Scottish Life. Based in Edinburgh, Stuart is passionate about creating access to the financial services industry for people of all backgrounds and is a mentor with MCR Pathways. Welcome, Stuart. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Ethan. Lovely to be here.
Well, let's start with your background and career journey. Where did you grow up? What were your early interests? And how did you come ultimately to enter a world of finance and investing?
So I was born in Edinburgh and I grew up in Edinburgh. And it sounds like I haven't gone very far, given that I work in Edinburgh now, but I do spend a lot of time traveling and I do spend a lot of time in London. But if I go back to my time in Edinburgh, I was probably a normal kind of teenager. I played golf, I played in a band, I loved football, wanted to play football, but I was built like a rugby player, so didn't do too well in that. But the only thing that I really knew that I didn't want to do was to go to university and then go into a job that I wouldn't be able to play music or play golf in. And I realised that actually those jobs are quite limited.
Well, you have to tell me more about your music interests. I'd love to know what you play and how.
I played in a band. I played bass guitar. I'm actually sure I was only in the band because I had a bass guitar. Because when I was a teenager, bands were formed because somebody had an instrument rather than they were very good at playing it. But we had a lot of fun. And I played in the band till I was about 21. And then just other things took over. And actually, work career was one of them. I continued to play golf, but I decided that my days of being a bass player, I was never going to be a great bass player. And I think people were starting to realize that when other people could afford bass guitars and they didn't need me. But it was great fun.
That's great. Well, then you obviously did end up in a role. You can tell me whether you had time to play music and play golf in that role. What were the steps you went through to get to a role like Capita?
So what happened was I decided I didn't want to go to university. I did actually have a place in university as it happened, but I decided I didn't want to go. And my parents sat me down and said, okay, if you're not going to university, you're going to get a job. Edinburgh was a financial centre, certainly, and people joined banks and people joined insurance companies. My sister was in a bank, so I decided I would join an insurance company. That was the only reason. And I would go and work there for 6 or 7 months, save some money, and then I could go traveling and maybe go and play golf in some really interesting places. I joined at the bottom of the ladder, I would say. My tools of my job were a ruler and I had a handbook, a safety handbook. And what I did, and this will date me, is my job was to split printout that came out of the mainframe computer, and it was all joined up at that time with perforated edges. And I did that. And then I took it in a shopping trolley and I delivered it to the people that had asked for it. So that was my starting job. I then moved to being a junior administrator in pensions in Scottish Life, a pensions administrator. And at the time, back in 1986, there was a huge surge in the market. Pensions were really starting to become interesting. DC pensions were really starting to form. And Scottish Life grew at a very rapid rate. I found myself really by chance fairly good at solving problems rather than being in a particular career place. Therefore, I progressed quite quickly through Scottish Life and took on a couple of leadership roles. And then I moved really through the pensions industry, the benefits industry. I worked with Aon for a while, and then I joined Capita as the managing director of their pensions business. So you could actually say, and I've done all of the jobs pretty much that I'm now looking after through splitting print, although of course there's no holes in it now, and you don't have to, it's just not joined up, right through being a consultant, administration, and then going into leadership role.
Well, that's really interesting because that's that kind of bottom-up experience, though, that is perhaps, with the exception of McDonald's, perhaps not done as typically today with the management, that they actually have to get on the shop floor, so to speak. And you mentioned being good at problem solving. How did you also navigate the organization? Like, how did you make it clear that you were the person to solve the problem? Where did those kind of people skills come from?
You know, it was something that just happened. I would be given a job when I had the splitting of the print. I had to go through the print page by page, put it into piles, but I kind of discovered that there was a pattern through the print, and that if I took certain chunks and I then put them in a certain place, I could basically save myself about 2 hours a day in terms of getting it split and delivering. When I went into administration, similar thing. The job was about, at that time, it was about data input. And it really was about sorting the data before inputting it rather than putting it in the form that it was coming in. So kind of creating a standard format. It sounds like I grew up in the dark ages of computers, but at that time, there wasn't really a filter to put these things into the place that you would expect, or to have data set out in a way you would expect. So it happened by accident. And then that's continued. If I think about my career, it's been in transforming something that isn't quite working the way that it's expected to, or something that has a new opportunity and needs to transform, and then identifying how to do that and then driving that through. You know, you've got to bring people with you. You've got to make them part of the process. And I think I quite quickly realized that asking the people around me or involved in a task, it was much easier to identify where the challenges were and also potentially the solution, and then pull that together, rather than trying to do everything and figure everything out on my own. So I think that there was a natural progression, but also I really enjoy, and if I think now about my job, if I think about the things that I really enjoy, it is sharing an issue with people around me and us working through and coming up with a solution. And I don't think that was any different in 1986 than it is probably now. I'm just maybe slightly better at it, and probably slightly better at listening to other people rather than thinking I've got all the answers.
Really interesting. Definitely that listening piece is key. Moving now to where you are today, your title is Business Transformation and Growth Leader. So clearly the state of the industry, where the puck is going, so to speak, or I'm sure there's an appropriate golf analogy there, is not going to be on your mind. What is at the forefront of your mind now as you help clients navigate the environment, thinking about the role for pensions going forward?
I think there are two things, and one of them I don't think has changed in the last probably 20 years. The first one is education. I think one of the main challenges with pensions is that people don't necessarily understand what they have. They don't understand what a pension is. And a lot of people don't really engage with a pension until they get near pension age, until it becomes something that they may have known was in the background. And they think, actually, do you know what? I better find out what that is, because I now need it, or I'm going to need it in the near future. And I think because of that, there are a lot of surprises. There's too many surprises. So educating people on why pensions are important, why they are beneficial, and why, to a certain extent, putting your money into a time capsule that you're not going to be able to unlock for 20 or 30 years, even if you do it bit by bit. You don't need to do it consistently, but even if you do it bit by bit, why that is important, and why you'll get the benefit of investing money early and over a large number of years, 20, 30 years, rather than trying to address it when you realize you've got a problem, which is often 5 or 10 years out, which is far too late. So education, and I think that whilst that's got a lot better from a digital perspective, and also in how people learn, because there's a lot more about how do you engage the individual rather than talk and trying to teach everybody the same way. I think that's better, but I think there's still work to do. And the other thing I think is digitizing the pensions industry. I think the pensions industry has moved at the pace that the pensions industry has dictated it should move, and the providers have dictated that it should move rather than demand. I think that's changed. And if I looked at the end user of a pension scheme, who is the member, the members are now demanding a different service. They're demanding engagement, they're demanding an understanding, which brings me to education, and they're also demanding a user experience that is more akin to Amazon rather than sending a letter on a piece of parchment written with a quill pen and waiting for 6 to 8 weeks before you get an answer. So they have changed. I think education, we've still got a lot to do, but it's getting better. But digitization for sure. I think the way that members are consuming is much more akin to a retail bank or even a retail experience. And we've got to change to make sure that we're meeting that.
Of course, technology is so key to that. But if you were to look at, because I'm really intrigued by this engagement piece, because that does still seem to be a big shortfall. Unfortunately, people not getting engaged till maybe it's too late in terms of their pension pot. What would you say is the kind of the reach that you're getting as it may be percentage terms in terms of the people who need to be reached? And is there anything that you think more can be done to really address that in terms of raising awareness?
You know, I think the reach varies, and it depends on industry for sure. And it also depends on the type of jobs that people are doing. I think you might assume that people in financial services would be much more engaged and much more aware of pension schemes. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that employers can do a lot. I think pension schemes can do a lot in engaging members by when you join, that joining experience is not the last time you hear from your pension scheme, that you're getting regular updates, that they are setting up seminar sessions where you can learn either individually, because a lot of people are more comfortable doing something individually online than they are going along to a user group, or if you like the company, going along to a user group. So the reason I'm kind of avoiding the question, Ethan, but I think it's that we've got pension schemes where we have 90+% members actually engaged, logged in regularly using their pension scheme portal. We have others where the pension scheme portal is there and very few are using it at all. And I think it goes hand in hand with how do you keep engaging, how do you keep communicating so that there is something interesting. Because if you're talking to, I talk to my children, I've got 5 children. When I talk to my children who are 18 and 19, they've got no interest in pension schemes whatsoever. And although one of them is in a pension scheme, they don't log on regularly or they don't use their phone regularly to see what the pension fund is, because as far as they're concerned, there are far more interesting and far more important things now. But regular communication, regular push on communication so that at least people are being informed and educated at the point of joining, I think helps it.
Really interesting. And let's move now to another one of your passions, which I know is mentorship and access to the industry of financial services for all, for more, particularly around socioeconomic mobility. Can you talk about some of the work you've done, the initiatives you've put in place to improve access and some of the groups you work with?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there is a talent pool. What's interesting now, of course, is that there is, following what was the Great Resignation in the UK, and I think how much further beyond, I think there is a real shortage of skills. I think there is a talent pool which has been missed for a long time, and that is people who don't necessarily have university education and don't even necessarily have a CV that reads too well of school qualification. I'd go back to the fact that people learn in different ways. And I did an exercise when I was with Aon where we actually used a business who tapped into, it was very specific to Croydon, South London, but they tapped into talent there and effectively CV-less talent. And it was called Classroom to Boardroom. And they would advertise a job, they would get applicants, they would take the applicants through what it was a process that I thought was just magical. It was much more about how they reacted to the people around them and how they reacted to tasks than it was about doing an end of year exam. And we took on, in the end, 15 apprentices to a certain extent, and none of those 15 we would have tapped into had we gone through normal recruitment. And I would also say, Ethan, we went out originally to get 10, so that was the brief, but we wanted to take 15 because we ended up with 25 people who presented to us. And we just thought they were absolutely fantastic. And we could only take 15, but we took 15 at that time. That, I think, confirmed my view that there is, and has been for a long time, a talent pool that is untapped, and particularly within some financial services jobs and around me. So we have now, within Capita Pensions, we now have 45 apprentices, and we've done 3 cohorts. We have another cohort who will be due in at the beginning of next year. And similarly, we're not just taking graduates, we're actually looking beyond that, and we're looking beyond the CV and identifying how can we tap into the talent pool that is out there. And I have to say, 100%, I would take enthusiasm and energy over qualification. Ideally, I'd take both, but I would take enthusiasm and energy. And that's what I've definitely seen in the days that I worked with Aon, when we did that fantastic exercise with Derek Brown and Entrepreneurs in Action. And now, as we've gone through these 3 apprentice cohorts with 1 more to come, what a fantastic group of people. And the reaction from within the business, from the people that I work with, from my colleagues, from other leaders, to these people and how they are fitting in, how they're joining the business, and then how they are learning, is just incredible. It is great to see, and I think we've got to do more of it. It's great that I've done some of it, but to be honest with you, Ethan, there is a lot more out there. And I think I would encourage all businesses to do more.
So interesting. And of course, that's how we met. And I can put the link in the show notes.
Indeed,
to that Classroom to Boardroom discussion. Very inspiring program. I suppose one of the issues that strikes me, regardless of where the entrant has come from, is the importance of support throughout the career. And particularly in those early years when, even though there may be a lot of enthusiasm, you mentioned this great attitude, this energy at the beginning, the workplace can be a challenging environment. And how do you then put in the supports to ensure that you retain that talent?
It's an interesting one. I think what you've got to do is you've got to make sure you've got a structured program, because if you just put people into a team after a short induction, then they will likely fall into a busy team and people won't necessarily have the time or take the time to teach and to show. And I think you've got to have a structured program, and you've got to have mentors, people that can support, that can have a conversation outside of direct work environment, that can have a conversation and also coach and help and link and connect. I think a lot of businesses are getting that now, to be honest. And I think that mentoring programs are certainly within the businesses that I've worked in and the business I work in now, mentoring programs are a key business tool that is used to develop talent coming through at very early levels, but also to ensure that you've got succession coming up through businesses. And I think that will become more and more important given the skills and the situation that we're in within the UK and the rest of the world. So I do a bit of mentoring myself, and also I've been mentee on 2 occasions, and that's actually incredibly rewarding, as in I've been a mentee to somebody who has just joined in their career, and they talk to me about how they're experiencing things. And it's actually a really interesting switch of role, and certainly from my perspective gave me a real understanding of some of the challenges that people face. A good example, we make an assumption that everybody has working Wi-Fi. Sometimes people don't have working Wi-Fi. They can't afford to have Wi-Fi on an ongoing basis. And that's something that the working world has made an assumption on, but isn't necessarily always true. We always expect that people will have access to a laptop or to an iPad. I don't mean, obviously, from a work perspective, people would have those tools, but that isn't always necessarily true. So I think it's important that we tap into the pool. But once we tap into the pool, and that pool isn't just people that I'm talking about who don't necessarily have a CV, as people start in business, that we are encouraging them, that we can give them clear career pathways, and that we have the right mentorship and coaching in place to make sure that when they need help, they have it, but also when they're not sure, when they don't even know if they need help, that they can get that help, which could be coaching, it could be sorting out a problem, or it could be connecting that person to somebody else that is going to help them to grow in their career.
It's so interesting. It gets back to your point earlier about listening. So listening for this feedback from the new entrants and young people in the career, but also having the environment where they feel comfortable speaking up, which of course is so important. And then on the broader issue of diversity, so having been in the industry for as long as you have you seen improvements in diversity in general across the board, not just socioeconomic? And maybe what grade would you give it at this stage? Here we are in 2022.
Wow. Yes, is the answer, but not quickly enough. Not enough, not quickly enough, I would say. But I think that it's gathering momentum. I think that pensions has been quite a grey, in terms of aging, male-dominated environment, certainly in the areas that I've worked. I'm not necessarily saying the whole of pensions. I think that that's changing. I think that's changed. I think there are now, for example, Next Gen, which is out, which I think is challenging, particularly into the pensions industry, new talent coming through. I think from a gender perspective, we are seeing more people following through their career. I remember a statistic, and this is going back 5-6 years ago, but the number of qualified actuaries as women who then went on to fulfill an actuarial career in senior roles versus males was something around 25% in comparison. I think that, again, is starting to change. And I'm also seeing businesses engaging more with people who have taken a career break, male or female, who have taken a career break, and inviting them back into their business and getting them back onto a trajectory that they would potentially have had before their career break. So not enough, not quickly enough, I would say. Giving it a grading, that's a tough one, right? C minus.
It needs improvements. Yes, exactly. That's kind of what that C minus would suggest. Well, let's get back to your personal story now, because I think we need to talk a little bit more about some of the extra interests, which sound really interesting. But also in terms of, let's talk about highs and lows. Would you say after quite a significant career, you can look to any highs and lows or turning points maybe in there?
The highs have always been when I've worked with a great team and I've been part of a great team. I've felt like I've been part of a great team. Definitely the highs have come from that. Of course, winning work, doing something well for a client, getting promoted personally is always fantastic. But I think the real highs for me, being part of a great team for a period of time. And it is always a period of time, because particularly if it's a leader that you're working for, when the leader leaves, you might end up with either a new leader or somebody in the team may get into that leadership role, but it's never quite the same. Everything is about a dynamic. So I would say that there are probably 3 teams that I've worked in that have been real highlights. The first, I would say, was in my time at Scottish Life, when I was just probably getting into my 20s, and we had big problems to solve, and we solved them. And we spent a lot of time together in the office Saturdays and Sundays over a long period of time, but great people, and really enjoyed working with them and enjoyed the environment. The second, I would say, would have been my time with Aon, and particularly in the early years, I worked for a very inspirational leader when I started with Aon in 2007, and it was an inspirational business. So I would go back to that team and that team dynamic. And then, of course, I would have to, as you would expect me, talk about today's team and the team that I work in now, and the team that I have working for me within Capita Pensions. Definitely a highlight. But I'd say the team is the highlight.
And it's interesting what you mentioned about that not lasting forever. I think that there's sometimes that we all expect it will, but also recognizing that it's almost like a kind of chessboard. We go through different phases of careers, and we really makes you maybe appreciate that time when you're in that really incredible, unique sort of sense of energy, and then maybe not, but equally appreciating it because it can't last.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, there are times, I think, in your career where, certainly in my career, if I speak for myself, where I've taken a step back and I've either realized that I've not been doing something the way that I would have liked to have done it, maybe authentically, or also I've, as a result of not listening necessarily, that I've not done something maybe for a client in the way that I would have liked to deliver to them. Those are lows, but I think they're learning experiences too. It's the old thing of fail fast, no regrets, and everything's a learning experience. I'm not quite in that place, but I do think that you learn and you become stronger as a result of that. And if I think about my early 20s, I was running a team. I was wet behind the ears. I didn't really know what people management was. And I probably learned the hard way with people and also with some clients, I would say, because I was in quite a senior position at an early stage. And yeah, you learn, you get stronger, and you make sure that the next time you do it differently.
It's interesting. That's quite a characteristic of other guests I've had who's maybe at a similar stage in their career. They were given a lot of responsibility at an early stage, and almost an alarmingly early stage, when they didn't feel they had it in them, but it was usually somebody else believing in them, or sometimes necessity. There was simply no one else to fulfill the role. That does seem to have been really key to that growth, that personal growth. How do you do that now in terms of delegation? Do you feel comfortable finding that person that you think you believe in, maybe, but doesn't necessarily think they're ready for that workload, and just giving it to them anyway?
Yeah, and I love doing that. I love doing that, but also I love more when somebody is not necessarily performing, and you kind of know that they're good, but you can't quite work out what it is. And when you find the thing that it is, and it's just about listening and understanding somebody, and then asking them if they want to have a go at a role, and they fly, I don't think there's a feeling like it, actually. And I think that's definitely something that I would say leaders should be good at. I think we are quite quick. Maybe I'm speaking to myself about myself as well, and comforting myself with the word we. But at times, I think in my past, I have been quite quick to judge somebody if they're not doing the role that I was expecting them to do, as opposed to, that's maybe in my 20s and my 30s and 40s, I think finding the right combination, unlocking, and just watching people fly. That is such a fantastic thing to do. I think it's a responsibility of good leadership. In terms of finding people to do things, I had a very inspirational leader at one time who said to me, actually introduced himself as a team manager and said, everybody in my team is better at what they do than I am, but I make sure that I pull that team together and get the best out of them. And I thought, that's the kind of leader I want to be. And that is exactly certainly where I am now. Everybody around me is definitely much better at what they do than I am, but I see my role as encouraging, engaging, helping, supporting, and at times just unlocking the right combination to get people to do amazing things.
So were there any key people throughout the course of your life so far that really were pivotal in you taking this course?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, and probably too many to mention, but come to mind, my father, definitely. I suppose people always look to their father, but my father, integrity, balance, and calm. And many of the qualities that I don't have. I don't mean integrity, I have integrity, but he's very calm, and I learned a lot from him in that way. A school teacher who told me in secondary school that they were being paid to be there, and therefore it was only my time that I was wasting. I reflected on that and thought, yeah, okay, need to kind of get a grip here. And several individuals, colleagues and leaders, Scottish Life, Aon, through Capita, inspirational people who do inspirational things, and probably quite topically Doddy Weir, who sadly passed away on Saturday. But inspiration is all around us. And I think we can all learn a lot outside of business as much as in business.
And what was it about Doddy that was most inspiring? His resilience in his illness? Did you know him personally?
I didn't know him personally, no, but I did go to a number of Scotland games, as you would imagine, at Murrayfield and abroad, where we did the walk for My Name is Doddy. But I think what I admired about Doddy Weir, and a lot of sports people who are in a similar situation, after his diagnosis, he redirected his energy into finding a cure for motor neuron disease and raised millions as a result of doing that through his foundation. I think what an inspiration. And I was glad to see, I was at Murrayfield for the Scotland-New Zealand game, and Doddy was there, and he came out and got an ovation from 66,100 people and the players on the park.
And thinking about inspiration like that, is there any creed or motto that you live by now, or any words of wisdom that you could share?
My words of wisdom would be, listen to the facts. If you haven't got the experience yourself, go and ask somebody who has, and don't be afraid to say, I don't know. They might not sound particularly wise, but I think certainly at the time I was growing up, and certainly the environment I initially, from a business perspective, grew up in, there was almost a question about an individual who would say, I don't know the answer to that, as if we all needed to know all of the answers. And I think just saying, I don't know, but I do know somebody that does know, and I'll go and find out. And then learning from them, learning about it and moving forward. I think that's important.
Well, thank you so much, Stuart. From the first time we met on that classroom to boardroom breakout room session that we held, I knew that you were a giant in the industry, making huge contributions to the socioeconomic mobility problem. Seems like solving problems has been part of your career. So thank you so much for coming here with such humility and sharing this wisdom and really opening the door, I think, for other leaders to think as you do. So I really appreciate you coming and sharing your insights with us.
Thanks very much, Aoife. I really enjoyed talking to you. Really enjoyed the experience. Thank you.
I'm Aoife Devitt. Thank you for listening to the 50 Faces podcast. If you liked what you heard and would like to tune in to hear more inspiring investors and their personal journeys, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as investment advice, and all views are personal and should not be attributed to the organisations and affiliations of the host or any guest.